what's up everybody? How's it going? Today we're going to be fixing a broken Nintendo Switch. This is the 2019 revision, and this is my youngest brother's. So the story here is, he said that one day it wouldn't turn on, so he took it apart, but he didn't have any Y-bit drivers, so he took off the side rails first, and whenever he did so, he ripped the ribbon cables off of the side rails because you can't take the side rails off without taking the back cover off first. So today we're basically just going to be opening this thing up and replacing the side rails so that way the Switch can make connection with the Joy-Cons properly. I ordered these Joy-Con rails off of eBay, and I think they were only about $13, which is cheaper than I thought, honestly. I figured they'd maybe be closer to $20, but it wasn't a bad price. The other good thing is, these actually seem like quality replacement parts. I was a little bit worried because they're not OEM, but they're still made of metal and everything, and they feel high quality, so I wouldn't be too afraid of ordering some aftermarket ones, as long as they're decent. So in order to get this thing apart, there are two 00 Phillips screws on the bottom, and there's one up at the top. You want to be very careful with these screws because there are a lot of very small screws on this console, and they're pretty easy to strip, so you definitely want to be careful of that. As long as you're not too rough on them and take your time though, you should be alright. The other thing I want to warn about real quick is, since all these screws are so tiny, you definitely want to make sure you put them up somewhere where you're not going to lose them, because they are extremely easy to lose. Alright, so the next screw we need to take out is behind the micro SD card. So in order to take that card out, I'm going to go ahead and turn the Switch completely off and remove it so we can get to the screw. I know that you can see the screw with the micro SD card still in there, but definitely don't try to remove the screw with the SD card still in there, because I definitely think it will damage something. But now that's it for the 00 screws. So next you're going to want to get a Y number 2 driver and take out the 4 screws in the corner here. I once again would be super careful with these. They're definitely bigger screws, but I don't know why Nintendo insists on using these Y screws, because they are probably the easiest screws to strip that I've ever messed with. So just be careful. So now that all those screws are out, I'm going to go ahead and show you guys these side rails. And for some reason the screws were super tight in these. I don't know if they're supposed to be that way or if it's just like that from where my brother had taken them apart and just over tightened them. But luckily none of them were stripped. Once you get all the screws out for the side rails, you should not be able to just turn it over and it fall out like it did for me. And as you can see, there is supposed to be a cable coming out of this, but you wouldn't even be able to tell because it was just clean ripped off. So definitely don't ever take your Switch apart that way if you don't want to have to mess with replacing these. So now we're going to go ahead and take the other side off so we can get this thing taken apart. And once again, they were pretty tight on this side, but luckily, again, none of them were stripped. If anybody else is doing this repair, just make sure you're not putting the screws in too tight right there. You want to get them in tight enough that way the Joy-Cons are not hitting them when you slide them into place, but you definitely don't want them so tight that it strips something. And as you can see here at the bottom, you can see the remnant of what ribbon cable was attached to the side rail. So now that we have all the screws taken out, we can go ahead and take off the back plate. You just want to be careful here. There are some tabs that you need to pull apart at the top, so just don't rip it off or anything, just be careful with it. And as you can see, it's a little dusty in here, so I am going to clean it up just a bit. And the other thing that I want to do while I'm in here is go ahead and blow out this fan a little bit. These types of fans are notorious for clogging up with dust and hair and whatnot, especially in laptops, but I've seen it in Switches too, so it's best while I'm in here just to go ahead and blow it out. So next we need to take off this metal plate and there are 7 Phillips 00 screws that you need to take out in order to get the metal plate off. And you also need to take out the micro SD card reader. Once you've done all that, you can just go ahead and pull the metal plate off. And you don't need to take off the 2 screws up by the headphone jack. That's not necessary for this repair. So next we're going to be taking out these broken ribbon cables. And I know I say it all the time, but be careful whenever you're messing with ribbon cables. Not to be too rough with them, not to rip them. Obviously, these that I'm taking out right now don't matter because they're already destroyed, but you want to be careful with the parts that they go into as well, because you definitely don't want to mess those up. So now I'm going to go ahead and put in this new one, and I was going to try to just put it in first thing, but I actually decided it would probably be easier to put in a couple screws to hold it in place better. We're going to have to bend the ribbon cable some in order to get it to fit back in place properly. So if I was doing that without the screws in place, then it would probably just be going all over the place. And you can see the way that I'm having to twist this cable to get it to go back into place. So just be careful when you're doing this, because twisting it like this will make it easier to rip, but as long as you're careful and you take your time, you'll be fine. You're also going to want to tuck the ribbon cable behind the hole for the screw here, and this is just so that way it's not getting crushed by the metal plate, or so that way you don't accidentally put the screw through the ribbon cable. The other ribbon cable is a little bit more tricky because the cable runs in between the board and the battery, but luckily we can still get it out and get the new one in without having to take the whole board out. In order to make things a little bit easier to access to put the new one in, you can go ahead and unplug the battery. You don't need to pull the whole battery out, just unhook the connector for it, and then you can just kind of bend it up out of the way, just like that. And now we're going to go ahead and do the same thing we did on the other side. We're going to put the new rail in and put in 2 screws to hold it into place, so that way we can get the ribbon cable plugged in. And it's going to be hard to get this ribbon cable in, but you can kind of see how I wedged it in between the battery and the board, and once I started pushing it a little further in, it kind of just fell into place. But this angle here to get the ribbon cable plugged in is not the best angle, but it's definitely doable, and it's much easier still, in my opinion, than taking the whole board out just in order to plug in this one cable. And now, after a lot of struggling, it is finally in place, so we can go ahead and push it in there a little bit further and get this closed up. And you can see on this side that the cable is sticking up just a little bit, but luckily it's in a spot where it's not going to be a problem. And once you plug the battery back in, it'll kind of push it down a little bit anyways, so you don't have to worry about that. Now we can go ahead and put the metal shield back on, and just be careful when you're putting it back on. Don't be too rough with it and don't damage anything, but you shouldn't have any issues if you followed the way that I put the ribbon cables back in. And now it's time to go ahead and put all 7 screws back into place, as well as the micro SD card reader. And you don't want to forget any of these screws, because you want to make sure this thing is sitting completely flush the way it's supposed to whenever you put the back cover back on. Also, you want to be careful when you're plugging in the micro SD card reader. It uses what most people call a Lego style connector, so it is kind of hard to line up, so just make sure you have it completely lined up before you screw it down, because if it's not plugged in all the way, then it's not going to read your SD card. And now we can go ahead and put the back cover back on. Again, there are tabs up at the top that need to be snapped into place, so just make sure that you do get those snapped into place properly. And now that that's done, I can go ahead and put the 4 Y-bit screws back into place. And now that that's done, I'm going to go ahead and finish screwing in these Joy-Con rails. so that way I can test them to make sure they are working properly before I finish putting this thing all the way back together. And once you're done putting those screws in, it's a good idea to go ahead and slide the Joy-Cons into place, just to make sure that you have the screws in all the way and that there's not any issues or obstructions. And these are in fine. I was hoping that putting new rails on here would actually tighten up the way the Joy-Cons felt in this a little bit, but they do still feel a little bit loose. But as most Switch owners know, that's completely normal no matter what model of Switch you have, other than the Switch Lite of course. So that's completely fine here. So now that we know it is working properly, I'm going to go ahead and turn this back off so I can put the rest of the screws in, as well as put the micro SD card back in. You're going to have to put in the micro SD card screw back in first, because again, you shouldn't do anything with the screw while the micro SD card is in. And once you get that taken care of, it's time to put the bottom 2 screws back in, as well as the screw at the top. And now that everything is fully put back together, it is time for me to fully test this thing. So the Joy-Cons wouldn't even connect at all before. They were connecting with the wireless, obviously, but once the Joy-Cons went dead because they weren't charging, then he was not able to connect them at all after that. So we're not having any issues here. They're charging fine. They are connecting fine. So this was definitely an interesting repair, but it was pretty simple. It was a lot easier than I expected it to be honest. But let me know what you guys thought about this video. I'm sure not many people have this problem, but I also know that this is certainly not the first time in history that this has ever happened. So if anybody's watching this and you have had a similar situation happen, let me know, because it's kind of funny. I was giving my brother some crap about it, but I'm sure he's learned his lesson, and anybody else that does this probably learned their lesson pretty quickly too. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.